Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to untangle the incredibly complex web of Myanmar's ongoing civil war. We are looking at a conflict that is quite literally reshaping Southeast Asia. But, to truly grasp it, we can't just look at it from one single angle. We need to understand it from the ground-level tactical battles, all the way up to the global geopolitical chessboard. So, let's get started.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start right at the epicenter with the tactical resistance of Operation 1027. Then we'll examine the illicit economy of scams and drugs. And finally, we'll zoom way out to the macro level to look at China's border interests, Russia's support for the junta, and the broader U.S. and global response.
Section 1. Operation 1027 and the Resistance. Let's get a feel for the tactical reality right there on the ground. So Operation 1027. This represents an absolutely massive kinetic shift in the conflict. Launched on October 27, 2023, this offensive was kicked off by the Three Brotherhoods Alliance, and that's made up of the Arakan Army, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, and the Tong National Liberation Army. In this highly coordinated, sweeping effort, they simultaneously attacked junta bases all across northern Shan State. Within just days, this alliance, fighting against the military junta known as the State Administration Council, seized over 150 military camps, multiple towns, and massive stockpiles of weapons.
The strategic impact of that offensive was honestly staggering. Across northern Shan State, the alliance seized key border towns like Chinchue-ha and Hseni. By doing that, they effectively choked off vital national highways and isolated major junta strongholds. The military junta even lost control of a regional command for the very first time since Myanmar's independence. So this wasn't just some minor border skirmish, right? It was a massive redrawing of territorial lines right along the border with China.
Now, you might be wondering who exactly is fighting who here. It's like a giant puzzle. On one side, the resistance is this diverse, sprawling coalition. You have the Three Brotherhood Alliance fighting alongside powerful, long-standing ethnic armored organizations like the Kachin Independence Army and the Karen National Union, or KNU. And they're also joined by groups like the KNLA, the Chin National Front, the Shan State Army, local defense forces like the CDF, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, plus the newer post-coup People's Defense Forces. They are all fighting to topple the ruling military junta, the State Administration Council, which took power back in that 2021 coup. But crucially, it's not simply a two-sided war. You also have heavily armed groups like the United Wa State Army taking a neutral or uninvolved stance, basically preserving their own vast autonomy while carefully watching the balance of power shift.
Section 2. Scams, drugs, and conflict. Let's pull back a bit and examine exactly why these specific borderlands are so violently contested.
The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime points out something critical. We aren't just looking at a political war. We are witnessing a mutually reinforcing convergence. So what does that actually mean? Well, the civil war creates widespread lawlessness, which allows illicit economies to absolutely boom. The staggering profits from these economies, whether that's narcotics flowing through the Golden Triangle, massive money laundering, or online scam operations, then flow right back into the hands of armed actors, which funds even more conflict. It's a vicious, self-sustaining cycle operating right in plain sight.
And this Golden Triangle network creates a massive global problem through cyber scam centers. Here's how it works. Step 1. Criminal syndicates traffic individuals not just locally, but from all across the globe. We're talking places as far-flung as Brazil, Kenya, and the Netherlands. Step 2. These victims are trapped inside fortified compounds in Myanmar and forced to work under incredibly abusive conditions. Step 3. They're forced to execute sophisticated online fraud campaigns targeting the life savings of unwitting people worldwide. So the instability in Myanmar is literally creating financial victims everywhere.
200,000. The UN estimates that a staggering 200,000 people have been trafficked into Myanmar and neighboring Cambodia to execute these scams. Let that sink in. This isn't some small, localized criminal enterprise. It is a massive, industrialized system of forced labor and fraud operating directly in the shadow of Myanmar's civil war.
Section 3. China's geopolitical border interests. With chaos right on its doorstep, how is the region's biggest superpower reacting? Let's zoom out again.
Now, what's really fascinating here is China's massive strategic pivot. Initially, Beijing maintained this stance of nominal neutrality. A big part of that was their outright fury over those cyber scams we just talked about, which were victimizing hundreds of thousands of Chinese citizens. They even tacitly allowed Operation 1027 to proceed, mostly because the resistance groups promised to wipe out those scam syndicates. But as the resistance gained too much ground, China's stance completely flipped. Fearing that the junta might completely collapse, leading to state failure, or, even worse from their perspective, a new pro-Western democratic government, China began forcefully supporting the military regime. They started closing borders and heavily pressuring ethnic armed groups to halt their advances.
So why does China care so much? It really boils down to three core interests. First, the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. This includes dual oil and gas pipelines running from Myanmar's coast straight into southern China, which allows Beijing to completely bypass the strategically vulnerable Straits of Malacca. Second, resources. Myanmar is the world's second largest producer of raw rare earth materials, which are absolutely vital for modern technology, and China is the sole beneficiary. Finally, it's pure geopolitics. Beijing views Myanmar as a key part of its sphere of influence and is absolutely desperate to keep any Western presence out.
Section 4. Russia's support for the junta. Let's explore how another global power has become a critical lifeline for the Myanmar military.
Since the 2021 coup, and especially since the invasion of Ukraine, Naypyidaw and Moscow have embraced tightly across three vital sectors. Militarily, the junta relies heavily on Russian-made aircraft and weapons to fight the resistance. In return, Russia helped solve Myanmar's energy crisis by providing discounted crude oil. Their state energy giant, Rosatom, is even planning to build small modular nuclear reactors in the country. And economically, both of these heavily sanctioned nations are working to boost bilateral trade and tourism. It's really a partnership of mutual isolation.
Get this. Astonishingly, not only was Russia the only major power to validate the junta's coup, but Myanmar is the only member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations to publicly endorse Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. And even more surprising, the Myanmar military has actually transferred military supplies, including mortar rounds, back to the Russian armed forces for use in Ukraine. It just goes to show how deeply intertwined these two military regimes have become.
Section 5. U.S. policy and global responses. So, where does the United States fit into all of this? Let's examine the broader global reaction.
The cornerstone of American policy here is the Burma Act. It provides a structured, albeit limited, framework for U.S. involvement. It authorizes the State Department to impose targeted sanctions on the junta and its financial networks, and it mandates pushing the UN Security Council for a global arms embargo. Crucially, it provides discretionary authority to fund non-lethal assistance directly to pro-democracy forces, including the ethnic armed organizations and the People's Defense Forces. Finally, it allocates funding to investigate the junta for suspected war crimes and crimes against humanity. So it's a strategy of intense pressure and support, but strictly avoiding direct lethal intervention.
But U.S. policy doesn't exist in a vacuum, and the fallout from this conflict spills out in literally every direction. India, seeking to counterbalance China, is also heavily investing in Myanmar's infrastructure. Meanwhile, there's a literal tsunami of synthetic drugs, like meth, fueled by precursor chemicals from China, flooding out of the Golden Triangle into the rest of Asia. Furthermore, the frantic scramble for resources to fund the war is causing massive environmental ruin, particularly from unregulated, highly toxic rare earth mining along the Mekong tributaries.
So the absolutely crucial point is this: Myanmar's conflict is no longer just an internal struggle for democracy. With deeply entrenched illicit economies funding the frontline resistance, and global superpowers like China, Russia, and the US all pulling different strategic strings, we have to ask, will Myanmar's future ultimately be decided by the will of its own people? Or will it be dictated by the strategic interests of foreign powers? It's a heavy question for sure, and one we will be watching closely. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.